Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Haitian American Museum of Chicago's program this evening, Queer Collaborations and Practicing Co-Performative Witnessing in Haiti by Dr. Mario LaMothe. This program is a part of HAMOC's Scholar Series, where presenters and guest lecturers talk about topics related to Haiti and the Haitian diaspora. My name is Carlos Bossard, and I am the Executive Director at the museum. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It's really good to see you here. HAMOC's mission is to promote Haitian art, culture, and history in metropolitan Chicago and surrounding suburbs, nationally and internationally through advocacy, education, and supportive services. Education is at the core of our mission, and we are glad to continue bringing insightful, meaningful, and impactful lectures and programs to the community. Before we begin, I do just want to do a little bit of housekeeping and let you know the format of tonight's event. First, this meeting is being recorded, so if you do not wish to be seen, feel free to turn off your video cameras now. Also, you all were automatically put on mute as you entered the room. Please remain on mute throughout the program. I am about to turn on right here, auto-generated captioning. This is just for accessibility reasons, and if you do need the full transcript at the end, please feel free to reach out. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A session with Dr. LaMothe, moderated by HAMOC's educator and grant writer, Ben Henderson. Ben has been with the museum for over 2 years now and continues to be a huge asset, supporter, and friend of the museum. Ben?
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Henderson, and I'm the educator and grant writer at the Haitian American Museum of Chicago. As Carlos states, the Q&A will take place after the presentation. However, please feel free to put your questions in the chat during the presentation for Dr. LaMothe to answer afterwards. During the Q&A session, all questions must be made through the chat. I'll be monitoring questions throughout the program and relaying them to Dr. LaMothe. Dr. LaMothe is a cultural anthropologist from the University of Chicago at Illinois, where he teaches courses on Afro-Caribbean religious practices and culture. His research primarily focuses on the intersectionality of spirituality, Haitian dance, and the struggle for Black and queer liberation within Haitian culture. For today's program, Dr. LaMothe will be discussing the struggle and discomfort and the benefits that emerge from documenting Haitian activists' response to national policing of same-sex desire in Haiti. Everyone, please welcome Dr. LaMothe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, HAMOC, Elsie Hernandez, Carlo Bossard, and Ben for inviting me to speak with you today. I say honor and respect to them and to all of you for holding this virtual space with us as I reflect on my decade-long collaboration with queer Haitians and their allies through several aspects of our interactions. So how will I do that? I will introduce my involvement with LGBTQ health projects in Haiti, focus primarily on my collaboration with openly gay Haitian photographer Josué Azor, and quickly review the Soto Saint project incubated at HAMOC this past spring. And perhaps HAMOC at some point, Carlos or Ben, Carlos, if maybe we can put the link when I get to that portion of the talk, if we can put that link in the chat box, in the chat, so folks can look at the exhibit or what the virtual exhibit we did. That would be nice. And to wrap up, my conclusion will briefly grapple with trepidations I have about serving as a legal expert witness for queer Haitian asylum seekers in the US. Okay. These engagements, my collaborations with queer Haitians, are relationally constituted with my research output that investigates how queer bodies are policed in Haiti amidst continued flare-ups of anti-homosexuality demonstrations and aggressions by asking, one, what is the impact of popularly and state-sanctioned gender and sexual codes of conduct on queer bodies, exercise of self-care and self-love? And two, how do ethical responsibility, or how do ethical responsibilities apply in the context of vulnerable populations, such as my collaborators. As I myself am called to be a witness, an ethnographic witness. In terms of my ability to respond to my interlocutors, contextualizing their embodied, creative, and activist responses to the national and international policing of Haitian people demands the utmost sensitivity and care for them and all involved in the engagement. I endeavor to be my interlocutor's co-performer, and I'll give you a brief definition of what that means. According to D. Soini Madison and Dwight Conquergood, a co-performer, that is a person who labors with their collaborators, deeply in action with them, is an engaged and committed witness. I am a scholar and a critical ethnographer who is humbly yet dynamically co-present in my collaborators' fight for social justice and equity. At least I hope I try to be. We journey together through socio-politically charged Haitian life worlds as we stretch ourselves and Haitianness beyond social, cultural, and political barriers. And much like Madison and Conquergood, I too am inspired to share time, space, and resources with Haitian LGBTQI Haitians, work in solidarity with them, value alongside-edness, center dialogic interanimation and political action, and always celebrate matters of the heart and soul. I also believe the concept of co-performing and witnessing is equally applicable to non-researchers, like, for instance, Josue Azor, my main case study for today, who pools his resources, knowledge, and abilities with his own collaborators. Aside from self-identifying as a gay Haitian man, my attention to LGBTQ Haitian world making began in 2011. I worked in Haiti at PSI Haiti as a sexual health and education manager for a Men Who Have Sex with Men project, MSM project. PSI Haiti is a Haitian chapter of an American NGO whose mission, at least it was called PSI Haiti, now the name has changed since. It's called OMAS, I believe. PSI Haiti was the Haitian chapter of an American NGO whose mission is concerned with sexual behavior and family planning in developing countries. As part of my project, I partnered primarily with Fondation COV, and there's a photo on the screen, to conduct outreach activities which receive its funding and protocols from the US government under the skeptical watch of the Haitian Ministry of Health. All of that to say is that basically it was a US funded program for about 5 years or so. Then I developed and implemented a comprehensive nationwide education, information, and communication curriculum. And I'll show you one of the activities we created. One of the activities I conceived is sort of a strides and obstacles game about the rewards and challenges of feeling being fully realized. All participants must make it to the finish line and be supported to do so for the game to end. Like, everybody has to finish a game somehow, however long it takes. And that's the fun of it, that we all do this together. We all collaborate together. And if those of you, I'm gonna linger on this slide a little bit. Those of you can read Haitian Creole, might have some insights into the icons and steps to take along the journey. Messages and tasks on the board and its cards are written discreetly and are double coded. So if you can read Haitian Creole, if you read some French and you can read Haitian Creole, you'll see that if this game were to fall in hands that were disapproving of same-sex love and desires, they could think that it's a game like any other about HIV/AIDS, right? It's not terribly explicit. However, there are many things on the photos, and we can talk about that later, that folks in Haiti would know means, like it's a queer life world if they're gay. Message and tasks are were they to fall in the wrong hands, only people in the know would actually know. We can discuss the game later, as I just said. The game was and continues to be really popular. Even I left the Haiti 5 years into after when the program ended. It's still being continued. When I went to Haiti December 2019, it was still a staple of LGBTQ Haitians, not only from my organization, but other organizations had adopted it. And it won a highlight, sort of best practice highlight in the Journal of Pan-Caribbean Research and Social Marketing for innovating thoughtful interventions in the social marketing approaches and thoughtful care of MSM's needs. In March 2011, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in Washington, D.C. invited the Haitian state and the LGBT Haitians to speak about the ongoing and persistent violence against same-sex desiring and gender non-conforming people following the 2010 earthquake. So here we are, 11 years later. When no privileged queer Haitians with an American visa, residency, or passport were to testify, and there were many folks who had been in Haiti longer, and we can talk about, like, I had moved to Haiti to do research in 2009. The earthquake happened when I was there, and I did refuse to, I didn't want to go back to Chicago Northwestern where I was doing my PhD. I decided to stay, and I parlayed myself into a job as a sexual health and education manager at PSI Haiti. But there were other folks who were more qualified, but no one wanted to testify. No one wanted to be out. The privileged Haitians who were there who could testify on behalf of other Haitians. So I volunteered, and facing the large assembly in Washington, D.C., and facing hemispheric American human rights advocates and Haiti's representatives who stared me down, I advocated for my collaborators' social and psychological welfare as I relayed heartbreaking first accounts of correcting violence they suffered. So the program ended in March 2015. Our American funders decided to focus their interest strictly on testing and treatment as a means perhaps to finally introduce PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, to the Haitian market. Consequently, I left Haiti to continue my academic career in the US and continue to return for various public health, artistic, and ethnographic collaborations. Many of my team leaders are currently at the helm of their grassroots organizations, which invest in opportunities that privilege LGBTQI lives as critical entities in Haitian knowledge production, as well as incite the men and women to self-care and to self-love.
Very quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt. Oh, there we go. I was like, I don't see anything on the screen. There it is. All right.
When I don't have an image that's not relevant to what I'm saying, I just have I have a black slide. So there'll be another one later. So in terms of scholarly modality, my colleagues, Dasha Chapman and Aaron Durbin, and I co-edited the spring 2017 special issue of Women in Performance, Numache Assam. We walked together, like you're seeing on the screen. And we conceived this issue to shed light on the economic, political, and social challenges our interlocutors continually confront. And we're proud to say that it was and still is the first volume to strictly focus its attention on queer Haitian Highlanders' engagement with environmental degradation, intersecting forms of structural violence, and transnational links to queers of color in the US. The journal also features my peer-reviewed oral history narrative, Our Love on Fire, Gay Men Stories of Violence and Hope in Haiti. Developed to channel and amplify the voices of queer Haitians, the factual script recounts events that took place on the evening of August 10, 2013, during which an engagement ceremony between a Haitian man and a gay British Red Cross officer attracted the wrath of their Port-au-Prince neighborhood residents. Those outside the compound where the engagement ceremony took place rioted, torched the upscale residence of expatriates, lit cars on fire, and terrorized guests. And I present the narrative in academic and other general public contexts to advocate for queer Haitians' battle cry against homophobia, transphobia, and sexism. Building upon that script and the special issues momentum, I am launching a web-based queer Haiti oral history archives that will document perceived tolerance of gender and sexually fluid men and women on the island and in diaspora, and their creation of joyful, safe spaces in Haiti and wherever they are in the world, as they seek not only to critique violations to their human rights, but also to transform them. The project plans to spotlight the artistic activism of gay Haitian photographer and other queer creative practitioners like him. But to go back to Josue, here's a preview of the work that I've been doing with him since we published a special issue. A telling object. A photograph in Azor's Noctambule Queer Nightlife series, this image pulls our focus to its bottom edge, to a cracked windshield, a time mid-violence. Long threads fan out from a heavily damaged circular center. An invisible exterior light source casts silver threads on the cracks and accentuates the person's furrowed brows, sullen or questioning eyes, reflected in the rear view mirror. Barely illuminated ahead outside the car is a white structure with vertical lines and a taller multicolored one on the side of the passenger. Magnified, these structures appeared to be a gate and a wall. But let us take a step back. Behind closed gates, inside of a car damaged by a weighty object, sits Azor with the photograph subject. Given the position of the shot, a driver must also be there. On the other side of that wall, a group of 50 or so enraged Haitians are protesting a gay interracial engagement ceremony by hurling rocks, Molotov cocktails, and insults at the celebrants. Depicting guests' escape from the harrowing scene of the August 10, 2013 festivities in Port-au-Prince, Azor's image pauses an altercation 3 years in the making, following the January 12, 2010 earthquake. The catastrophe instituted a new and international calendar for the reconstruction, sanitization, and development of Haiti. And we can talk about how perhaps a week ago or about a week ago now, the same sort of idea of Haiti's renewal, rebuilding, all those rhetorics are just, or those ideas are popping up again, right? American Baptist missionaries were first among Haiti's saviors. Their work and that of their local emissaries implemented widespread evangelization of ruined Haitians, and so they said. More to the point, this teleology of progress began with the mistreatment of gender and sexually non-conforming Haitians, very similar to the person in the photograph. Scrolling through Azor's photographic series, Noctambule, Garçon Solide, and Erot, beginning in 2013, I index how the photographer cultivates epistemologies that alter toxic representations of non-conforming Haitian bodies. Azor chronicles queer bodies' attempt to divest themselves of patriarchy's normative performances, hang between the dystopia of their homophobic and transphobic environments, and invest in creating uplifting experiences saturated with moments of freedom, joy, and boundlessness. Born in 1986, and you can see a photograph of Josue Azor on the screen, the photographer has exhibited regularly in Haiti and abroad, and to support his artistic pursuits, he does similar public health work as I did. Zooming in, I will briefly identify how Azor's visual performances capture bodies in dissent. To borrow a phrase from Daphne Brooks, who actualize mutually affective processes of evocation, attention to long-standing terrors that haunt their contemporary realities, and provocation, a critical persistence to expose and work through those violations. I believe Azor's queer body of work engages in a visual form of performative witnessing. Writes Azor, quote, "I really insist on saying it. It's a gay man or queer person photographing the male body." And he primarily shoots the male body. So back to the quote. "That's why I insist it's very important for me to stand behind the images and to reveal myself as a photographer. The queer aspect and the queer aesthetic will be more evident in a certain way. So these documentations are not like throwing a stone and hiding your hand," which, end quote. And throwing your stone is hiding your hand is a Haitian saying, voyez wash caché me, or something like that. I began my examination with this photograph, a piece of a larger tableau of other photographs that commemorate various aspects of the gay engagement party. So here you can see, this is the interracial couple. It's the ring exchange ceremony. Well, that's pretty clear. Photos of guests. And the theme colors were orange and green. Friends of the fiancé, the British fiancé, sort of fleeing the compound. Cars being torched outside of the compound where the engagement ceremony happened. And these are other photos of, let's see. And I welcome the opportunity later to discuss Azor's reservation about disseminating photographs of these photographs. He's very sort of concerned about who uses them, how they circulate, and like that the story is being told as they're being shown, like the way I'm doing right now. So yes, I welcome the opportunity later to discuss Azor's reservations about disseminating photographs of guests fleeing and cars burning, because he does not want to advance the fallacy that Haitian people or Black people are more homophobic and transphobic than other ethno-racial groups. And better yet, the engagement ceremony images are only a subset of the Noctambule series, which focuses primarily on the following photos. So perhaps a drag performance by queer Haitians. So primarily Noctambule chronicles the everyday practices of queer Haitians. These photos depict the rapturous celebration of queer identities as an exercise of liberation from nationalist affiliations based on heteronormative practices and behaviors. This and similar celebratory images aid Azor in creating queer beacons that invite viewers to acknowledge ways that Haitians devise the parameters of their own self-determination. Of all of those, along with this particular image, Azor, along with this particular image, evoke Azor's practice of witnessing. He is in the car with party guests, and seeing, hearing, sensing, feeling, and living through his collaborators' terrors, the artist pivots from a me to not me stance in this photographic testimonials. To testify that his collaborators are fighting for full human rights and affirming futures, Azor stands behind his photographs, quite literally, to humbly stand with and alongside his acolytes in a relational formation that after Edouard Glissant displaces all reduction of their lives. However, for the most part, Azor is the only out witness, one determined to alter transparent depictions of the queer Haitian person. He creates opaque images of his subjects. His technique deliberately fragments body parts, excavates subversive gender and sexual figurations, blurs time indicators and spatial markers, and transposes photographic styles. He shows Haitian's brand of queerness as emerging, unfinished, and always in progress. And I also perform the witness via the way I read, my strategies for reading these images based on my health education experience with queer Haitians. My interpretation is especially attuned to my continued collaboration with Azor in a number of artistic and research pursuits since we met in 2008. We are twinned in keeping the praxis of co-performative witnessing as our ethical compass and in deploying our relative privilege to respond to criticisms and violence. In Port-au-Prince and Jacmel in July 2013, during the Haitian Coalition of Religious and Moral Organizations anti-homosexuality protests, the words "nous pas d'accord," "we disagree," and "Aba Masisi," "reject Masisi," became a festive mantra the clergy and their followers chanted to censure homosexuality and homosexual marriage because those would destroy the sanctity and futurity of the Haitian family and the integrity of Haitian society. Surreptitious, bestial, fruitless copulation between men and their world trigger the woes of the nation and sully the values of its moral and upstanding Haitians. And we can talk about what I mean by that. We can unpack that in the Q&A. This anti-homosexuality rhetoric ebbed and flowed until September 2016, when protests and violence resumed in Port-au-Prince due to the national premiere of the festival Masi Madi. And that festival was canceled its 4-day celebration of performance and visual arts by Haitian LGBTIs after organizers and the festival co-sponsors, the French and Canadian embassies, were denounced and received death threats. Having observed and listened to those dissenting Haitians, and I assisted a few of those demonstrations when I lived in Haiti, I surmise that the poetics of desire and deep intimacy as are captured in the image we're viewing were not qualities attributed to bodies that some Haitians perceive to lead claustrophobic, static, and really dead lives. Within the narrow frame, the space of these interlocutors' interaction is sedate, vast, inviting. For the two nude brown male persons and the white cat that populate the portrait, time flows languidly. Coming together or drawing apart, these strong men, as the series title indicate, occupy a space that shelters them from the collective fury beyond the sight of the image. These subjects conjure boundless sexual identities that might disable institutions' preservation of homegrown values evolving from the cultivation of indigenous forms of Blackness and heterosexist ideas. The men isolate themselves from the collective need, not only because they cannot and or choose not to perform one or several norms of the dominant groups, but also to center the immediacy of internal contacts between themselves and their kin. Basically, this is their space to be whoever they want to be. With this photograph, Azor demystifies what might be perceived as queer Haitians' dismal, marginal life, since religious and moral gatekeepers deny them access to systems of economy, education, and social structures, giving that they evade national ideals, and codes of conduct. Yet, quote, "This is a personal secret garden," end quote, asserts Azor of such intimate moments. Quote, "I am very attentive to what happens before and after I take a photograph," end quote. The lower halves of two male bodies in the missionary sex position are transposed of our Haitian landscape of rolling hills, lush green trees, and a few stately homes in the foreground. On the horizon, in the upper section of the image, the cloudy sky merges with the Caribbean Sea. The image of the copulating bodies is overblown and so transparent that it seems to fuse with or fade out from the image of the landscape. Azor has reworked the image during the resurgence of homophobic violence in 2016 and posted it online with the caption, "We are love, sex, and magic." The original image of the couple is from Azor's series Erot, which exhibits two muscular male presenting or men presenting having a person having sex. As an ensemble, Erot's photographs portray male bodies who exalt in an embodied freedom that only pleasurable consensual sex affords. Voracious moments of ecstasy such as these might thrust queer Haitians towards self-care and self-empowerment. Erot hails a future time beyond the era of massive incivility and violence toward LGBTQI Haitians, in which they will engulf the territory to make it a liberated space for all same-sex desiring male people at home and in diasporic spaces. The magic to which Azor aspires might be rooted in Vodou practice, which he documents in an earlier series called Racine or Roots. Quote, "It's a religion that allows you to be more, it's more permissive. When you are in an environment when Vodou is very present, it's probably easier to see two men kissing, even if it's within the Vodou ceremony proceedings, even if those men are the vessels of two spirits who are kissing. What remains, what lingers for us, the spectators, is the image of those two flesh and blood men kissing." Azor, end quote. Azor and various scholars do not deny that heteropatriarchal structures might possibly thread or exist in Vodou's temples and compounds. He is acknowledging that Vodou carves a space for its subjects, and there they are often revered as enlightened gender-shifting messengers who mediate communications between human and spiritual realms. And as no one and nothing is lost to Vodou, the magic Azor invokes in this photograph is one in which a fleeting impression of sensual and sexual bonds between same-sex persons possesses the transformative potential to circumvent gender and sexual oppression on the island and in diaspora. Kissing and fucking have the power to divest Haitians and their detractors of their misconceptions about cowardice and courage, weakness and strength, and femininities and masculinities. Erot is Azor's visual medium to reanimate and cultivate love, sex, and love of sex in Haitians' life, especially given that LGBTQI persons in Haiti and abroad steadily receive the subliminal message that their ways of exercising love and desire leads to death, theirs and that of their kin, and is destructive to what has been popularly sanctioned as a responsible Haitian personhood. This image intercedes in the descriptions of queer Haitians as death-bound or socially dead by remembering, reflecting on, and reimagining practices that have animated Haitians amidst long-standing systems of oppression. Leaving the Haitian earth behind, the couple teleports themselves to the Vodou continuum that collapses realms and temporalities, and in which partakers revel in the exhilarating pleasures that can be found through skin-to-skin and soulful contacts. They are reaching for modes of affection and play that have been denied to LGBTIs, ones they know they deserve. And in the interest of time, audience reception of Azor's photo documentation can be discussed during the Q&A. A too brief epilogue about a reluctant witness. So we're gonna go to a black slide. How do I navigate between my positions as a researcher, support system, and advocate for who endeavors to destabilize knowledge creation and circulation about Haiti, a globally imagined shithole country, as eloquently stated by the former US president? I honestly have more questions than answers. And I think that's really fertile ground, right? With Josue Azor, Dasha Chapman, and Mamia Prosper, we continue this work, I'm missing a slide, no matter. We continue this work through the Sexualities Working Group of the Haitian Studies Association to catalyze new networks and knowledge between scholars, activists, artists, and queer Haitians living in resistance to multiple assaults on their existence. Through a series of performance festivals, working sessions, and an online resource platform, we collectivize shared commitments to bolstering the work of queer Haitian crusaders. In spring 2021, so not very long ago, between I think March to May 2021, I also oversaw and co-curated the Assoto Child at the Altar project at HAMOC with Haitian visual artist Alexandra Antoine. It was funded by the Propeller Fund, and it will be staged as a performance at Lynx Hall in this coming December as part of my co-mission residency there. So I'm very excited about that. I am also paused to be an expert witness in US political asylum cases for 2 sexually queer Haitian males. The hearings are delayed due to the coronavirus and should proceed in a few months. I am intrigued by how legal witnessing in the courtroom and in testimonial reports might be a form of ethnographic witnessing itself, and that I am aiding in activating queer Haitians' hope. Central to that thought is Michelle Rolfe Trio's idea of the moral optimism of anthropology, a combination of truth and possibility, recognizing the richness and variability of humankind, given the inequity of oppression in the world. Witnessing in the legal sense and throughout my work is perhaps a form of moral optimism, an armor for uncertainty, a weapon to be wielded against fear, intolerance, and hatred. And earlier I mentioned matters of the heart as an intention of co-performative witnessing. In legal witnessing, emotions such as anger, uncertainty, hope, and possibility come together in very real and material ways. I am ready to stand for with alongside my Haitian kin. But what about writing reports that must be stripped of any condemnation of US neo-colonial machinations in Haiti since the Black Republic's formation in 1804, and instead celebrate the US as a safe haven for all non-white immigrant bodies, contrary to what our current reality illustrates. Beyond this ambivalence, my expert testimony relies on ethnographic knowing, what I learned, what I was taught, what I shared in the field. Could expert witnessing be an applied, activist, non-academic example of ethnography as theoretical storytelling? Here, the expert critical ethnographer provides context to stories across geopolitical and cultural boundaries through their own privileged position. My hope or moral optimism is to deploy collaborative work as always political, drawing from the lived experiences and contextual complexities of my Haitian interlocutors. And of course, from mine. It is the hope that our co-performances will challenge existing inequalities and oppressions and catalyze the necessary changes for a more just world. Thank you.
All right, that was a very nice presentation, Dr. LaMothe. Now, we already got 2 questions in the chat. The first question is a pretty basic one. Is homosexuality still illegal in Haiti? Is it legal in Haiti?
Well, that's a really good question, in that homosexuality has never been illegal in Haiti. Why? I'm not a I'm not a historian, but I think if you understand the Americas as a deeply colonized space, each colony's inherited their colonizers, I guess, worldviews and legal worldviews, right? So for instance, Haiti being colonized by the French, and all French colonies never had sodomy laws. contrary to British colonies that have sodomy laws, right? So Haiti has never had anything related to sodomy laws or homosexuality because the French never had it in their constitution. As a result, there is nothing in the constitution that bans same-sex desire, same-sex love. However, what the Haitian state does, or religious and moral leaders, as I explained, or anybody actually, as a matter of fact, who feel that homosexuality or same-sex sort of engagement is wrong, everything else is used to correct that behavior. For example, the instance I can give is that the engagement ceremony that was taking place, right? The neighbors sort of understood finally that something was happening there. They were seeing like men dressed as women or trans folks getting into the place. They sort of, by word of mouth, they understood that there was a sort of two men getting engaged, and they decided to torch the space. When the police officers came to the scene, they barely got the folks out of the space, and actually they brought the fiancés, at least the Haitians, because they couldn't touch the foreigners, right? But they brought several of the Haitians to the police station until the chief of the station came and said to the police officers, "You cannot arrest them. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just having a party." So no, it's not illegal in Haiti. There have been strides to legalize, to actually make it more explicit in the Constitution, to, let's say, I think that was the push. That's how the anti-homosexuality protests began, because some folks said, well, since France, I think in 2013, like France had sort of legalized same-sex marriage, and the US did, or like France did it first. And then there was this momentum that, oh, well, we're sort of, we're global citizens also. We should have rights, same-sex marriage rights in Haiti. And that's what launched the protest. Former President Jovenel Moïse at some point sort of like placated folks by saying, oh yeah, we're gonna look into it. But the moment he said that, massive protests resumed again. So I hope that answers the question. So it's not illegal in Haiti, but everything else, every other laws, everything else is used around those creations to correct their behavior if necessary.
That's really surprising. Like I thought, like British colonies, for example, they have laws, sodomy laws, that have been on the books for like over 100 years. That's right. Really surprising about Haiti.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying is, like, for example, if you look at the like landscape of the Americas, the folks were like, the folks were colonized by the Great Britain inherited those laws. And it still happens in some of the colonies. You have sodomy laws are very predominant in Jamaica, for example, and other the Caribbean, formerly British territories in the Caribbean. The Spanish inherited whatever, or like those Hispanophone countries also inherited sort of those moral whatever laws. But Haiti, all the French colonies, Haiti is I think the only one that sort of gained its that took its independence from France. But the French colonies never had it.
Okay. All right. Our next question is, are you aware of people being persecuted or worse for being openly gay in Haiti?
Yes, it happens all the time. I mean, I was, but again, yes, the answer is completely yes. I mean, I gave the example of an engagement ceremony being torched. Like, how many times have any of you in this room had a party and people came outside and just, torched it? So, of course, it happens. And when I spoke about how I'm poised to be an expert witness in sort of asylum cases, a lot of Haitians, the moment they were able to get a visa to come to the US or Canada, if they're LGBTQ Haitians, they also, a lot of them, if they can't get a green card, they also, at least they seek asylum. And the reasons they use oftentimes is due to persecution. So it happens. A lot of sort of violence gets they get swept under the rug. Some are not, they're never chronicled or documented. And so documentation is difficult to come by. And I think that's why also Josue Azo sort of tries to like do this like photo documentation. He began doing work like like Vodou and sort of like the Haitian peasantry. But he went into sort of like queer life worlds to just document that those people exist. So the idea is like, let's erase those people from sort of who are the proper Haitian persons, right? So persecution occurs. It's not often taught about broadly as a sort of a major civil rights issue. It's actually something to be corrected and sort of erased.
All right. Okay, for another question here, are Haitian families more accepting of their gay children these days?
I would say it's a case-by-case basis. I can't, it would be case-by-case. In my family, it took, I came out, I was born in, I spoke about privilege a lot, right? And my relative privilege. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I'm sort of 1.5 diaspora. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and when I was 5, my sisters and I, we went to Haiti to live in Haiti, and we went back and forth between Haiti and the US. So I do have, I have American status, et cetera, et cetera. So I finished school in the US, I went to college in the US, and I fell in love with I was supposed to get married to a girl and, all of those, like the things that are prescribed. But after college, I just came out because I was just tired of living that lie. It took certainly my sisters and cousins, like my peers, took it well enough. Some of them better than others, but they took it well enough because they knew who I was. And there were some jokes like from cousins like, "Oh, you're smart, you'll figure it out." But if I always say, well, what if I was dumb or like, oh, you're cute, you're smart, like basically like you're smart, you're intelligent, you'll make it through the world, so it's not such a big flaw. So I heard that rhetoric from my Asian family. My parents didn't automatically accept it. It took them years and years and years to even consider sort of somebody like a boyfriend entering the house with me. But when my niece came out as a lesbian, it was easier to accept within my family. No, I mean, I don't know. I think the idea is that it's not so widely accepted, especially in Haiti. I think when you're diaspora, because when you live in diaspora, you're also in communication and communion with other life worlds and other ways of being. There might be a little bit more sort of a relaxed behavior about, or like sort of relaxed philosophy about same-sex love. But from my understanding, it's not, there is never sort of the hallmark sort of moment where they're like, I love you and I accept you for who you are. I don't think that's not the predominant story for Haitian families.
Okay. Well, we have 2 appreciation posts from 2 of our guests. First one's from Elsie. Dr. LaMothe, enjoyed your lecture. Great presentation. So proud.
Thanks, Elsie.
And the next one comes from, I'm having some trouble pronouncing their name. Hello, thanks for sharing your knowledge. I really enjoyed your presentation, John.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we don't have any other questions in the chat right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there is one. Go, yep, David, perfect.
May I go ahead? Okay, thanks. Dr. LaMothe, fascinating presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've been a fan and supporter of Haiti for dozens and dozens of years because one of my family members married a Haitian guy long time ago. So there's a family connection, and the whole gay stuff is always been something a little bit in the back of my mind. You're the first person who has addressed it. So thank you very much. If you need any help helping the immigrants in Chicago, I am ready, willing, and able to help. So I'll put my hat in the ring for that.
Thank you very much. And you can always, like, if you go, I'm sure, you can always funnel your messages through HAMOC, and HAMOC will relay them to me for sure.
I will do that.
I have to tell you that I don't know how, and this is another conversation. I'm trying to figure out, like, I'd love to to understand how Haitians in Chicago come together. I definitely know that HAMOC is a hub. Thank you, HAMOC and Elsie, and I think Elsie and I and Carlos have spoken about that. It's one of the few hubs where Haitians, because it's a creative space, right? It's open to new ideas and other ideas and other ways of seeing the world. So it's a hub where we encounter a lot of Haitians who are, if they're not sexually queer, they're mindfully queer, right? They're thoughtfully queer, like they think more broadly. But I mean, as part of like the Haitian community here, you also have folks who are on the conservative side. So I really I think I spoke with Elsie about it. Like at some point, I'd love to understand how Haitians in Chicago come together and how they sort of repeat or dismantle all of those worldviews with which we grew up, all of us Haitians. And I have to say that, and there's a great deal of Haitianness that I'm so proud of and support wholeheartedly, of course. I think gender and sexuality is a part that needs to be thoughtfully reconsidered by Haitians. And along the line of gender, not even queerness, but misogyny, we have to think about sort of gender equality and parity in the Haitian community, misogynistic tendencies, et cetera. Basically, the same sort of codes we have in Haiti, I think they get reproduced here, but I think they also get destabilized here. So I would love to sort of figure that out, how we come together and sort of replay or undo some of those, the more problematic tendencies that we have, or the prejudices that we have that, that could make us stronger if we were to undo them. So thank you for your question.
All right. Okay, so Carlos just said we have time for one more question. Does anyone want to swing a bat?
And anything goes, really. And we can go back to the photographs. When I speak with my students, I'm like, I don't think there are any dumb questions. All questions are great questions. And I'll figure out a way to spin it if I need to.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other upcoming projects you're working on?
Yeah. So the Asoto Shala the Altar project that was incubated at HAMOC, we were supposed to do sort of a live performance when HAMOC and I decided to mount this project, and that was a pre-COVID idea. But since COVID hit, we had to we reconfigured it into a visual arts exhibit. And so I resubmitted the project to Lynx Hall as part of their co-mission residency, and mine, it was apparently it was tough competition, but it was accepted as one of 5 projects to be featured as sort of Lynx Hall commission projects. So it really deals with queerness in Haiti. It is based on the life. It's a project that tries to remember the legacy of Asoto Saint, who was born in Les Cayes, Haiti in 1957 and passed away in 1994 due to complications related to HIV/AIDS in New York City. He came to the US when he was a child. He was a queer performance artist, poet, and activist. Those of you who know a lot of Black poetry or Black queer poetry, or like filmmakers or artists, like he was a colleague of Marlon Riggs, Essex Humphil, part of this large crowd of New York sort of Black queer activists around the time of the AIDS, the epidemic. So it's a way I'm doing this project as a way that, and Haitians, really very few Haitians, if you're not like a scholar or like a really creative artist, you would not know about Asoto Saint. Certainly people in Black studies know about him, but us Haitians, that's the memory that's been sort of like stifled. So the project sort of wants to remember his legacy, remember his poetry, remember how, for example, somebody like myself, had I known that Asoto Saint existed when I was coming out or coming up, it would have given you a bit more hope, right? So I'm trying to create a connection between Asoto Saint then, and so him as an elder and as an ancestor from the beyond who's speaking to current generations now. because we can see his life in the 80s, 90s, and so many of the parallels, so many of the problems still exist today. So it's a performance piece. It'll be a dance performance art piece at Lynx Hall in December of this year that will rethink the legacy of Asado Saint. Other than that, one of the things that I'm trying to do, and I hope I'll speak with HAMOC about it, and perhaps they can have a link on their website if that's possible. I am trying to create like a sort of a platform, like a public humanities web platform that sort of puts like the archive of like queer Haitians, folks who tell their stories of love and joy, of violence, hope, whatever, all of their stories to be transcribed. You'll hear the voices and you'll have transcriptions in English, and those should be available for the general public to understand that these lives exist and they matter and they're thriving amidst severe oppression. So that's another part that I aim to do.
All right.
Thank you so much, Mario, Dr. LaMothe. As a gay man myself and learning and being immersed in Haitian culture, this conversation for me is super important. It's something that isn't talked about a lot. And, with the Soto Saint exhibition at HAMOC, it really started, sparking questions, and trying to find some answers. And so I'm very grateful, number one, that you gave this lecture, because I think it's super important. But number two, also just the work that you're doing. And, HAMOC will support that in any way we can. I'm so excited to hear that the performance is actually going to happen, because that was a huge part of it. We pivot as we need to, but I am very much looking forward to that. And so when that comes and when that's ready, and any other projects, let us know. We'll make sure to announce it everywhere, make sure everyone can see it, because again, the work that you're doing is really, really important. So thank you so much for being here today for that.
Thank you for these words. And by the way, Carlos photographed the exhibit at HAMOC, and those photographs are lush and beautiful. So a lot of credits and props to you. And you're an amazing photographer. I hope your work gets seen in Chicago.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Dr. LaMothe. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Again, some very powerful topics, very important topics tonight, and I'm so grateful that HAMOC can use its platform to share these important things to talk about. Ben, thank you so much too for a fantastic Q&A session. Everyone, just make sure to stay up to date with everything happening at HAMOC. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then also, like I said, once Dr. LaMothe's projects start rolling out, we'll make sure to let everyone know, because it's very important for us to, as a community, support one another in any way possible. Again, thank you all so much for being here this evening. We'll have the recording for everyone by the end of the month. Have a fantastic weekend, and we hope to see you again soon at another HAMOC program. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.